We're constantly learning more about the world of neurodiversity and how to appreciate that every person's brain works differently. Yet given the pressure to conform, to perceive, process, and utilize information in the right way, millions of people feel as if they don't fit in or can't cope in today's world. Fortunately, we are making great strides in understanding, embracing, and encouraging respect for neurodivergent individuals by emphasizing that different does not equate to deficient or broken. Today, I'm joined by a medical expert, Dr. Raun Melmed, who will dive in to today's real-life questions. I always felt like a failure because I couldn't focus and was constantly told I was stupid. I was finally diagnosed with ADHD, which explained a lot. My wife and I have a 3-year-old. I'm stressed because I think our little boy has ADHD. I recognize the signs. I don't want him experiencing the pain I did, and I don't want to mess him up. Any tips? And with that question as the focus of today's episode, I'm Dr. Carla Manly, and this is Imperfect Love.
Welcome to Imperfect Love with Dr. Carla Manly, psychologist, author, and relationship expert. I'm here to help unravel mysteries and misconceptions about love, relationships, and mental health issues, plus everything in between. Love is complicated, people are not perfect, and relationships surely can be tough. Together, we'll navigate this messy, imperfect space of real life.
Today, I'm joined by a very special guest, Dr. Raun Melmed, who will be sharing his expertise on ADHD, autism, and anxiety. Dr. Melmed is a developmental pediatrician, clinical director, author, and so much more. Welcome to the podcast, Dr. Raun. It's such a joy to have you with us today.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
So before we launch into the podcast, can you tell our listeners a little bit about what makes you, you?
Okay. Well, first of all, the thing that would possibly be attention grabbing is my accent. So people always ask, where are you from? Da, 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 da. So I'm from South Africa, and I left South Africa at the end of medical school. So I went to medical school there and then studied in a number of places around the world, and ended up in Boston, New York, and then Arizona. And that's where I am right now. I'm a developmental pediatrician, I'm a pediatrician with a subspecialty in development and behavior. And I see children and adults with autism, ADHD, developmental challenges. Some of them are typical children who just seem to have challenges, and others are children who have more difficulty. Their morbidity in that situation is higher. I'm involved with autism research and been the proud founder of the Southwest Autism Research and Resource Center. That's SARC for short, SARRC, Southwest Autism Research and Resource Center. Wonderful nonprofit organization. Look it up on autismcenter.org. It's a lot of good information there. But I'm also involved in actual practice of seeing parents and children and adults with the day-to-day challenges. So basically, I have a little bit of a research background, clinical research, as well as a very maybe practical, in the trenches kind of situation, experience with this very wide population of neurodivergency.
So you also work with adults.
I do, yes. The interesting part about humans is that the children often become adults.
Let's hope.
Yes, we start as, what do they say? You start as children to your parents, and then you become parents to your children, and then you become parents to your parents, and then eventually you become children to your children.
Uh-oh.
Right. But I mean, that's the course of it. And we found that so many of our children who graduate from the pediatric traditional age group don't have any place to go because the adult medical world is not necessarily ready for the avalanche of children who are now becoming adults with ADHD, certainly with autism. Now, more and more adult practitioners are getting used to that and feel more and more comfortable with that. But we still have difficulty locating specialized treatment for those populations, which is the reason I went into seeing adults. And for example, adults being diagnosed for the first time aren't quite sure where to go. Definitely with autism, definitely with ADHD. Where am I supposed to go? Psychiatry, my GP, my PCP, a developmental pediatrician. Is there such a thing as an adult developmental internist? Well, there isn't. But sometimes we fill that gap, yes.
Thank you from the bottom of my heart for the work you do, because I know there are a lot of adults. I've worked with some, I know some personally, where they do have ADHD and it was never diagnosed, and they would resist the diagnosis now because now the ADHD is a familiar friend, so to speak, or a way of being. And so the idea of facing it later in life can be somewhat threatening. Have you found that?
Absolutely. What caught me about that question, which you read, was at the very beginning, how this adult, this father, the concerned father, must feel about himself. In order to have ADHD, we always talk about you have to have two sides of a coin. The one side of it is you have to have challenges. You have to have dysfunction. You have to have challenges in doing what most people can do, can focus on their work, can get things done, and not be distractible and not be impulsive and not be overly active. So those are often the challenges. But on the flip side of that, we also think of, well, those challenges are present in many, many people, but are they causing harm? Is there dysfunction? Does the person not only have dysfunction, but do they have harm? I use that term, harmful dysfunction. They've got to meet both criteria. In other words, they've got to be failing. So we insist upon that in the diagnostic criteria. They've got to be either failing academically, if they're children, or failing on the sports field, or failing at home, or failing socially. If they're not so failing, regardless of how many symptoms of ADHD they might have, they don't have it. Because that's the DSM-5. It says you must have failure as well. The interesting part about, well, what areas do you fail in? Maybe you're a bright individual and academically you've skimmed by regardless. You've kind of gotten your family together, but not that much. The biggest and the most under-recognized failure is self-esteem. The impact that having constant people telling you, we know you can do better, you're just not good enough right now, we know if you just try harder, we know that you mean well, and having this constant barrage of challenges being heaped on your head, parents say, well, he doesn't seem to mind, she doesn't seem to bother us with, oh, yes, it does. Oh, yes, it does. And often in adulthood, parents are just adults, beaten down. Their whole life, they just haven't met. They thought they'd be they're bright people. They thought they'd be great entrepreneurs. They thought they'd be wonder mothers. They thought their households would be perfect. It doesn't turn out like that. And I'm a loser. I'm a failure. That self-esteem has impacted them. Recognizing that as a harm which is being done to adults is key. And that person, that voice that you used when you described what the question was, that's the first thing I thought about. Oh, God, here's another one. An individual whose life has just been battered this way and that way with constant negativity.
Absolutely. Yes. And I just want to jump in for a moment. Because so many people take the idea of failure in a highly charged way. I like looking at it as negatively impact. If you believe that there is a negative impact on your life, if you're not functioning at an optimal level, which includes self-esteem, because then that's where that cycle comes from, that cycle of negativity. If you're told by a parent that you're stupid, or not sufficient, or you're never going to amount to anything, or everything you do turns to crap, then that becomes this, and you may feel a little wobbly at certain life skills. You may not be as great at English or math or mechanical things as somebody else. So then those beliefs by others become your own beliefs, and thus that negative cycle and the self-esteem, either, if it was there, starts to erode, and if it was never there, just doesn't have a chance to build up, because you're surrounded by all of this negative talk from others and self-talk. So I like that idea of looking at it as, is there harm, right? Where is there harm in your life from the ADHD, the autism, or whatever issue is going on? So could you please give our listeners, even though most people are familiar with it, I don't like to assume, simple definitions of ADHD, autism, and the umbrella term, the non-official term of neurodivergence?
Well, the most, one of the nicest things about ADHD, even though it is a label, it's just become a very useful tool. The World Autism Spectrum Disorder as well, become a very useful tool to understand differences, because maybe my parents' generation or the generation before that, you're much younger, so you wouldn't know, but they didn't have terms like ADHD, and there was that lazy. This child is lazy. This child is crazy, or he's just dumb. Those were the terms that were used to describe individuals: lazy, crazy, and stupid. I'm not that. That's changed. The whole orientation about ADHD is to give us the vocabulary, give us the words to try and understand those individual differences. The beauty about this alphabet soup kind of labels, and there's a lot of things which are not that beautiful about it, but the beauty about it is at least it gives us some terminology so we can fully understand what's going on. So ADHD is a complex neurodevelopmental disorder, and we usually think about two sets of symptomatology which makes up ADHD. The first set is the inattentiveness, and the second set is the hyperactive and impulsive. And some children are more hyperactive, impulsive, and some children are more inattentive, and some yet have both of those symptoms together. So we talk about ADHD with an inattentive presentation, or ADHD with a hyperactive impulsive presentation, or ADHD combined presentation. The DSM-5 will change the issues all the time, and change our little labeling systems as if they're creating a new situation. For example, we used to say ADHD hyperactive subtype. No. Now we're not subtype anymore. We're now presentation.
Mm-hmm.
What a great advance. We're really making progress in terms of that. But so there, first of all, have to be those symptoms. Second of all, those symptoms have to be impacting a child negatively in two or more settings: school, home, sports field, socially. I've added that self-esteem issue. And also, the symptoms have to be present in more than two situations. So not only do they have to be present in more than two situations, they have to be causing harm in more situations. It can impact boys and girls. We like to think about these symptoms starting before the age of 12, and certainly symptoms evident before the age of 7, impacting a child. Depending on the age group, depending if they're adolescents or adults, there's a little leeway in having in the actual age of onset. Anyway, so that's ADHD, and that's the most significant. Those are the most significant points when we think about, well, how do we make the diagnosis? It's complicated though, because hyperactivity and impulsivity and distractibility are similar to me what fever is for maybe an infectious disease specialist. So just because the child has fever, we don't jump and say, well, they must have pneumonia,
Mm-hmm.
or they must have meningitis, or they must have a URI, or whatever else. There's a beautiful thing that medical students learn in the emergency rooms, and what they learn is that everything that wheezes isn't asthma. Because if you didn't take a history to find out whether the child was eating peanuts, and
Yes.
3 or 4 minutes later they begin to wheeze, you might treat it for asthma, and when in actual fact there's a peanut stuck in their throat. And similarly, for hyperactivity, impulsivity, and distractibility, those can be symptoms of depression, of anxiety, of learning disabilities, of sex abuse, of lead poisoning, of sleep deprivation, of chronic fatigue. We have to be awfully cautious about not just taking checklists and saying, yes, you check this, you check that, you check that. If you go online, you can do these checklist assessments and say, ADHD. It's never as simple as that. And we have to take it very seriously because it is a very serious condition.
Thank you. I want to pause here to really applaud you for saying exactly what you're saying, because often people self-diagnose, whether it's ADHD or something else online, and they see this checklist that might be really offered in good faith, but we have to contextualize it. We have to be able to go to the roots of it. And you're really a wonderful clinician, obviously, a wonderful doctor, because you go beneath the checklist to see the whole individual and to assess the situation, all of the nuances. And that is the danger of getting into a spot diagnosis or a checklist, because sometimes it's simply confirmation bias at work.
Absolutely. Well said. That's exactly the situation. So ADHD can be caused, the symptoms can be caused by many things. One of them is certainly ADHD. And the second part of it is also, we know that ADHD rarely travels alone. It almost always has other co-occurring conditions. Some people would call them comorbid conditions. I think co-occurring conditions is possibly more appropriate. And for example, are learning difficulties. 70% of the kids with ADHD have learning difficulties, not necessarily learning disabilities, but certainly learning challenges. There could be anxiety. How could you possibly be in trouble all day long and everybody moan and groan at you about how you are this and that and not be anxious? Or there could be associated, we talked about self-esteem issues, or there could be associated social interactional difficulties. If you're hyperactive and impulsive, you don't notice when you might be making somebody else feel embarrassed and making their faces turn red and they're starting to cry, and because you're on to the next thing, and you didn't notice that you hurt that person's feelings, and I don't like that person. They're selfish. They're just doing their own thing. They're just into themselves. They're not. Yeah. The social challenges of individuals with ADHD are huge. Adults might think that they're cute because they come up with all funny things to say, and younger children, 3 or 4 years younger than themselves, might find them fascinating. But same age peers, they don't necessarily like kids with ADHD. They don't want to be associated with them. There might be guilt by association. Anyway, they might not be that fun as playmates.
Absolutely. And I love how you were talking about the co-occurring disorders, because often when I was working with juvenile probation, I noticed that there was a high level of individuals who were either suffering from PTSD due to abuse at home or bullying on the schoolyard. And we can't underestimate the truth that if you have a parent who's calling you stupid or dumb or shut up and sit down, all of these things, oh, you're never going to, you can't do any better than that, you're such a, whatever, that, the emotional abuse, and sometimes there's physical abuse along with it, or abuse by the emotional abuse, the bullying that can occur on the schoolyard is horrific. to a child. It's horrific to anybody, but particularly to the child's growing brain and development. It can really have a huge negative impact. And we're back to your self-esteem, because self-esteem often goes hand in hand with negative self-esteem, often goes hand in hand with that type of abuse.
Absolutely. Self-doubt kills any kind of confidence. The good news is, though, developing confidence will kill doubt. So that's the reverse of that. There's so many of those interesting things when you use it in reverse. And that's why we got to start early and or late, or at any time, because it's never too late, to build confidence, and that will reduce doubt, and build ambition, because that will reduce laziness.
Thank you for saying that. I just have to applaud you again. I just love talking to you. It's never too late. And so for our listeners, the dad who wrote in, anyone who's listening, who's thinking, oh, I'm 40 or I'm 50, I'm 30, I'm 60, I can't change my brain now. Of course, you're 70 or 80. Of course you can change your brain. Of course, at any age. It might be a little harder when you're older. It might take more patience. But yes, would you agree we can change our brains at any age?
Absolutely. We know that to be true in a variety of different situations where there's still layering down of new cells in the cerebral cortex into the 7th, 8th, and 9th decade. So that's very interesting. I always remember a great story because I had this adult with ADHD. His kids came to see me as well, but I diagnosed him he's a household name. You would know his name. He's wonderful, beautiful wife, beautiful family, very rich, and has been to all extent, the most successful person that I probably have ever met. And when we started treating his ADHD with a variety of different modalities, he came in to the office and during the course of the conversation began to cry. And he was talking about, how the impact of treatment has affected him. And what you're crying? He says, if I would have known this earlier on in my life and taken charge of my life in this way that I've been able to do now, things would have been so much easier for me. I would have been able to achieve so much more. Looking at him thinking, oh my God, really, you're on top of the world here. And yet this person felt after being treated that he couldn't believe the impact that recognition of the concern, reading about the concern, acknowledging, treating it, how much that can make a difference. Yes, definitely. Especially adult women who are never diagnosed in childhood, not never, but we know that adult children, adult boys, the average age of diagnosis is 7 or 8, and when you go back and ask them, and the adult women we see in our clinic, the average age of diagnosis is 30 years of age. So there's a disproportionate number of children diagnosed, boys versus girls, in young kids, but in adults, women especially, definitively. Because our ratio of boy to girls, men to women in our adult clinic, 1-to-1, as opposed to 4-to-1 or 5-to-1 even in the elementary high school years.
It's so beautiful that you're addressing all of these issues, because our listeners, regardless of gender, it's helpful to know that if you're struggling with ADHD, with any disorder, when you find a diagnosis itself is no help, but using the diagnosis as a framework to create understanding, to get the support that you need and deserve, and to persevere until, as you were talking about with the man you worked with, the individual you worked with, finding the right clinician who can make you feel as though you can operate at your fullest capacity. That's what we want to enable people to do, mentally, physically, operate at our fullest capacity, which is different for all of us. So no matter how much money or external success we have, if we're all operating at our best capacity, we make the world a better place.
Amen.
So, well, thank you for all of the rich information that you are giving to us. So when we look at the dad who wrote in, and he's so worried, oh, I don't want to forget about getting the definition of autism and putting that out there, but returning to the dad's question, where he is very clearly worried about harming his little one. And maybe if we read between the lines, maybe he's also concerned about other people harming his son in ways that he was likely harmed. What would you say? What words of wisdom?
I think, first of all, congratulating the father in being able to bring to the fore his feelings and concerns, and he's particularly the poignancy of not wanting his own child to suffer the same way that he did when he was a child. So I think bringing to the he's already an amazing dad, because he's already looking to see the individual differences that are apparent. And instead of pigeonholing the child into being a mini adult, he's recognizing, as we all should be doing, that children are different from adults. Now, that sounds kind of so obvious, but it wasn't obvious to the previous generation. Children had to be little adults, and now we know that, of course, children have different temperaments from one day of age. 24 hours, even in a premature child, these children are different one from another. You can determine the differences in temperament in a premature baby. Amazing, but you can. There are standardized assessments to do that. The Brazelton newborn it goes all the way up to adulthood, where there are different types of. So first of all, saying, yes, we're different. Some of us are easy, and some of us are maybe difficult, and some of us are. It's not amazing words, not rocket science, but at least it helps to identify, yes, my child needs to be addressed differently. My child needs more of this and less of that. Children are not equal. Children are very different from one another. And there is no maybe bigger challenge for children than when we treat children who are unequal equally. As parents, we sometimes think, oh, everything's got to be exactly the same. If we recognize the children's individual differences, some of the children need more playtime. Other children might need more quiet time. Other children might need more alone time. Just simply like that, and being able to feel comfortable with you as a parent, being able to look at that and see it. Dr. Spock, the amazing Dr. Spock, not the man from Star Wars.
Benjamin Spock, yes.
Benjamin Spock. You
Yes.
know, his famous quote to parents was, "You know more than you think you do. You know more than you think you do." He put that in the front of every one of his books, Baby and Childcare, which was wonderful, looking at children with differences. Dad, you know more than you think you do. You know exactly what your child needs. You know exactly, first of all, that starts with awareness. My child is different, and that's okay. And my child might be more active, and that's okay. But certainly we want to be not necessarily authoritarian parents, but we certainly want to be authoritative parents. We certainly want to bring knowledge and information to the situation without just being, say, taught how to put a child in timeout and punish and develop behavioral plans. Maybe that gets into the realm almost of being authoritative necessarily, but authoritarian. However, this dad's on a different path. I can tell that already, because they're showing that awareness. And so what are we trying to do with our children? Well, first of all, we want them to be happy. And part of being happy and part of being joyful, even at this young stage, I believe, is trying to inculcate being mindful, being aware of what is going on around you in different ways. And children do this naturally. They very easily look at different situations and they pick up on the big picture and they identify what's actually happening without being necessarily sidetracked. How are we actually going to do that? I mean, there are different activities, for example, that this father should start be doing with his child. Let's start with exercise. We know that exercise is one of the most powerful non-medication treatments that there is for ADHD. So repetitive, rhythmical activities, left, right activities help not only to develop the brain, because it's almost like swimming in utero, and you're trying to replicate that by having this left, right activities, but it also enhances focus and concentration, and it also improves body strength and coordination. So my favorite activity to start with kids very young, from 3 or 4 years old, is basically the best movement sport of all times, swimming. So to start a child and teach them in a very rhythmical situation, because when children are swimming in a pool, across a pool, you can't tell which is hyperactive and who's impulsive and who's inattentive, because the left, right, repetitive behaviors is so incredibly helpful. That's why children with ADHD also like swinging. They love that rhythmicity. So starting to enhance rhythmicity within the home is a very great thing to do, and that's from an exercise perspective. I can go into more detail about that. But just jumping to the next level of rhythmicity, it's about music. Music has rhythm inherently to it. So having music and encouraging singing and encourage books which have lots of rhythm in them, Dr. Zeus books, nursery rhymes, especially love nursery rhymes for that age group. Da, 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 da. Not only will it be a great precursor to reading, but it'll also help to keep an inattentive child much more focused on the page when we're trying to read to them than if we just had to, for example, read a story necessarily at this age per se. So rhythmical poetry, rhythmical music, singing together in a family context, that's the type of rhythmicity. So the first step that we're going to go back to would be exercise, and then the music to enhance rhythmicity. There can be other things too, and we can go on and talk about them, whether it's nutrition or whether it's other fun activities to help make children more aware of what's actually happening with them.
If I can just pause to really join with you on the idea not only of being rhythmical, because no matter our age, but certainly younger ones, rocking a child, in a rocking chair, or as you were saying, on a swing, we love rhythm. Babies love rhythm. Toddlers love rhythm. Adults love rhythm. So I appreciate that piece because it's very doable. We can all find a way to add rhythm. The other part that I find just really fabulous, it's so in line with how I view working with children and adults, is the idea of attunement, of looking at, we say we love our children and love is so important. And I think one of the most wonderful ways we can show our love for our children, for our partners, for anyone, is to be attuned to them. And I know in my 4th book, The Joy of Imperfect Love, it's all about attunement because it's based on attachment theory. And when we attune, going back to your part that every human being is different, every baby is born different. And as much as it might feel easier to put everybody in a mold and say, these are the guidelines, this is what we need to do or should do or will do, it does take a little bit more work to see the individual, to attune to the individual. But if you do that up front, you make the child's life, the adult's life, the partner's life, the family life so much easier in the long run, because when we thrive, children thrive as well, of course, but we all thrive when someone takes the time to attune to us. So
yes.
Thank you for pointing that piece out about the differences, because that's so what worked for this person's 3-year-old. Let's say they have another child. and maybe the child does or does not show signs of ADHD, but that child may have very different needs. So even ADHD treatment is not one size fits all. There may be certain commonalities, but that's the beauty of it, is you get to be creative with your parenting to really notice, what does this person need? What does this little human being need? What makes them thrive?
Beautiful. You know, my favorite quote from Marcel Proust is, the real voyage of discovery consists not in seeking new landscapes, but in having new eyes. Mm. So being able to look at your child against the background, almost as a silhouette, with new eyes and seeing things, oh my, that's actually what's happening. That's discovery. I mean, it's true for discovering nature. So when you become more aware of animals and the intricacies of their lives, you understand things that you never would have seen prior. But when you look at your child and you look below the surface, just like you were saying, and you try and you become attuned to them. I think that's exactly what Marcel Proust was trying to say. When you become attuned to your child and you see them with new eyes, boy, you'll value them in such a different way, as opposed to just having a preconditions in your brain and saying, this is how I want my child to be. And if they don't meet that expectations, Lord, I'm just going to be so upset and depressed and feel like a failure. You see them as their own individual against the background with new eyes, and you'll have a lot more fun with your child from then on, and a lot more appreciation and respect for them. And that will be reciprocated. When children feel that respect, that gets reciprocated when they're taken seriously and identified seriously, without being pedantic and presumptive, just looking at them and saying, yes, I get where you are, and that's beautiful.
Absolutely. And I love that you said how it is reciprocal, because it is. Because when that child feels seen and loved for who they are, rather than the version of what the parent wants them to be, doctor, lawyer, baker, whatever it is, right? And that child is allowed to grow into being their best self, that child then looks back at that parent with those eyes of love and appreciation for having been seen and met for who they are, their individuality, and the best self that they will grow to be when they feel loved and supported.
I think so. We hear so much when we hear people saying thank you, whether it's at Oscars or whether somebody's been an amazing success in science or literature, always talking about how much they appreciate that their parents allowed them to be who they are, as opposed to standing in the way or blocking or sabotaging what they thought they should be able to be doing. I think we can learn something from that. And I think that this child's father is learning that, and this child's going to be all the more lucky for it.
Absolutely. And I'd like to invite you to share a few thoughts around diet. You were saying something about possibly food choices that might be most helpful for this dad and his little one.
Well, there's obviously a lot to be said about nutrition. There was one, I think Dr. Osler was a very famous British physician, said in the last century, mind you, that if the doctor of today does not become the nutritionist of tomorrow, then the nutritionist of today will become the doctor of tomorrow. So that's interesting words. I think that all of us are becoming much more tuned and aware of diet in a child's life. But the most important thing is, in terms of nutrition, is just to make sure, first of all, that the children are eating. You spoke about a juvenile detention center, and here in Phoenix, we did a study once in a juvenile center where, by the way, 80% of the kids have ADHD. That's not to say that 80% of people with ADHD are juvenile delinquents, because that's not true at all. In fact, it's a teeny percent. However, when we gave those individuals a good breakfast, it was amazing how different they behaved through the course of the day. And you might ask, well, what was that good breakfast? Unfortunately, it was just basically a sugary cereal, but it was much more than the nothing that they were prior eating and before having their different school programs. The first notion that I would suggest that every single child have protein for breakfast. I think it's a very important part of a diet is that children have, whether it's beans or fish or meat or eggs, that they have protein for breakfast. It's important as well to recognize that a lot of children with ADHD might have sporadic appetites, definitely if they're on any kind of medication, and they might not eat all at one time. I think it's important when kids who come home from school and sometimes see that they be given a small amount of complex carbohydrates, whether it's a quarter sandwich, rather than putting a whole big thing on the plate, putting a little thing which is easily to eat and easily edible, because a good mother will tell us, especially in the younger age group, when the child misbehaves, they're tired, I can tell, or they might say they're hungry, I can tell. Assume they are both. And if a child is more difficult in the afternoon at 4 o'clock and the bewitching hour of 5 o'clock when parents are getting home from work, that's the type of child who needs to have a quarter bread and butter sandwich or a quarter bagel or a couple of tablespoons of pasta, because that'll make a very big difference to their diets. Now, are there foods which might make a child's behavior that much worse? I like to, sometimes I think about excitotoxins that might make the children that much more active. And certainly we know excessive amount of sugar is definitely one of those excitotoxins. We know that MSG, monosodium glutamate, which is so present in those delicious foods that children like top ramen noodles, where those little crystals that you add to the noodles. I hope nobody from Top Ramen's listening, but those little crystals are like 85% MSG. That's what it is. That's all it is. It's not like some special flavoring. If you're going to give the noodles, and I know it's cheap and I know it's convenient, just don't use and even the rest of the noodles are still high in that. I would like kids to know that whatever color their tongue turns when eating a food, that's what color their brain is turning. So if they're having a Slurpee or a slushie and they're having green and blue Slurpees and slushies and they're in my office and they stick out their tongue, well, that's the color of their brain. It's clear that our children children who are having that kind of diet, that needs to be limited. Children have the average of 300 to 400 milligrams of artificial dye in their diets on a day-to-day basis. For some individuals might be that much more sensitive to caffeine, but certainly colors and one of the big colors that is a culprit is maybe caramel. I think I always forget how Americans say caramel. Caramel.
Caramel.
Okay, so it's caramel. There's a controversy about how to say caramel, and it is controversy, by the way.
I won't say controversy at all.
Controversy. Anyway, so that's as far as diet. And could there be any specific supplements? The supplements that I generally use are not nuts and are present in lots of people's diets. And for example, probiotics, there's no reason why we shouldn't allow, and we do know that children who have diet rich in probiotics have that much fewer mental health challenges in general. So having food with high probiotics, and it could be kefir or it could be yogurt, or it could be supplements with probiotics. That would be not a bad idea. I like omega-3 fatty acids. I think even in the younger age group, in the age of 3 years old, 200 or 300 milligrams of an omega-3 fatty acids, which is a combination of DHA and EPA. Don't worry about that right now, but the dosage is about 300 milligrams. You can get that mercury-free stuff in any supermarket, and certainly at a health food supermarket where you can pick that up very readily. When we become focused on, it's almost an overall orientation. I'm never quite sure whether any of these things that I'm talking about so far have the impact as much on the child, if you had to do a little double-blind study, as it is if a parent feels, you know what, I can do this. I can be in charge of this. This is not going to bowl me over. I know how to address my child. I know how to be aware of them, of their moods and when they're tired and hungry. I know what kind of exercise. I know what kind of. When a parent has that kind of confidence in their, it makes the job of parenting a challenging child a whole lot easier. And when they incorporate their child into the treatment paradigm, and they treat the child as an equal on the team, taking care of themselves, then we're really moving forward. And that's when we can get the child to be given agency to say, you know what, I can be in charge of this. I can be in charge of my body. I can be in charge of my mind. Yeah, we want children to be aware like that. I spoke about mindfulness at the very beginning. We want children to feel, yes, I can be in control. And the more we take them seriously, and there might be some other things like learning from books and bibliotherapy and different exercises, which they can try. There are a lot of different, sweet little things. One of my, favorite things, for example, kids who are very disorganized in the morning, and parents say, I can't get them dressed and they're useless and they're this and they're that. Take your iPhone, take a photograph of them when they're ready to go to school. When they're all on one particular day, they got their hair brushed and they've got their pigtails in place and they've got their clothes together and they've got their little backpacks with a lunch pail inside. And they've got they're showing their fact that they brushed their teeth and they finish. Take a photograph of that, blow it up, put it on the front door and saying, when we leave the house, we got to look like that. We begin with the end in mind. So I want you, little 3-year-old, 4-year-old, 5-year-old, definitely 8-year-old, to look at that picture and say, what's missing from where I am right now? So they can say, oh, that's how I want to look. That's how I want to be. There are obviously many different steps along the way. And I don't want to be too exhaustive about that. We might have to do a part 2 of this.
We might.
But nonetheless, that child needs to know what it is that they can do. What are they should be doing? So yes, there are things that parents can do. Yes, there are things that teachers could do, even in the preschool teacher in the classroom. Our whole community can be doing this. But yes, the child needs to be included as well in the treatment process.
Absolutely. And I love how in that example you gave, it gives a child something to shoot for, that little picture of them being successful and saying, see, we can do this. Let's make this our goal to get here, pretty well most of the time. I also really want to thank you for bringing up the part that's so important about ADHD and the diet choices, where we don't have to make it, and this takes me back to my time working with juveniles on probation. I am so glad that you brought up what you saw, because when I was working probation, I was given individuals and was told over and over again, we need an ADHD diagnosis for this kid. Give us an ADHD diagnosis. This kid has ADHD. And I'd do my evaluation and I'd say, first I'm going to start with talking to the child, doing a global screening. And one of the first things I did was look at their diet. What are they having for breakfast, lunch, and dinner? What is their day like? And then I created a little questionnaire so the kiddo could put smiley faces and how they felt. And overarchingly, not 100%, the diet was either no breakfast at all or a prepackaged pastry for breakfast. Lunch was whatever they could get at school, a slice of pizza, an adrenaline drink. Dinner was a couple slices of pizza if they had dinner, and some sort of sugary snack later on, a bowl of cookies, a bowl of pretzels, something. And that was the diet. Almost always absent were fruits and vegetables, protein. There were plenty of cheap carbs and loads of sugar, loads and loads of sugar. Once I started working with the families on creating, they didn't understand simple healthy steps that they could take that were affordable to get more protein in the diet. Like, as you said, peanut butter, yogurt, some of those basics that can be quite affordable. The level of the ADHD symptoms went down enormously. So enormously. Plus, in concert with that, I was working with the parents to help the parents to learn that sometimes the ADHD symptoms were pleas for attention. The kids they came home from a long day of being cooped up in school and then they're bouncing around the house. Well, they want to get rid of their energy. Going back to your part about, or they naturally have a lot of energy that needs to be dissipated in a positive way. So when I taught the parents, wait a second, let's take that kiddo outside, play some basketball with them, do some, jogs around the block, whatever it is. So many, not only were the families coming together more, the kids were no longer the big problem. There was such a shift, and the kids felt seen and they felt loved, and it was wonderful. It didn't cure all of as you know, it doesn't cure all ADHD, but it does bring down the symptoms and the number of people who are diagnosed when you pay attention to the whole person, which is what the dad is doing. And what you're recommending for the dad is look at the whole person, look at your kiddo, and notice what your kiddo needs in order to thrive, which includes all of the things you talked about, seeing the child, setting him or them up for success, doing some exercise that is, rhythm-based, some reading that is rhythm-based, music, and then looking at diet. So with all of those things, and I know there's a lot more. So as we prepare to wind up, Dr. Raun, what are a few more tips you might have? And you're right, we do have to do a part two, because we never did get to the autism and the overall other pieces. So I'd love to have you back. But with that said, what are some final tips for this dad and the mom, of course?
Yeah. Well, two or three things. First of all, we have to pay attention to sleep. The number one medical cause of attentional difficulties, how well the child is sleeping. How we pay attention to that, that's also another subject. But we have to, if a child is not sleeping well, their attention will be disrupted entirely the next day. Second of all, the quick tip. From my series of books, Marvin's Monster Diary, there's which would be, I think, great for any age group, for a 3-year-old or a 10-year-old for that matter. There's a little monster called Marvin, and he has ADHD, but he also has friends with anxiety and agitation. This is what one of the books looks like. I don't know if I can get that to the camera, but I can't, so I won't.
There it is, perfectly.
There it is. Marvin's Monster Diary. But one of the things that Marvin does, because this is a book to empower children and to teach them mindfulness, which he learns very on, one of the lovely tricks which he has, and I've started with my own kids, this one when they were very young, and you can start it with a 3-year-old definitely, is use what I call a monster camera, a monster cam for short. You take your fingers like that, it's as easy as that, and you go around the room pretending it's a camera, and you can zoom in or you can zoom out, and you can try and be aware of what other people are doing. Let me look at Carla and see what she's doing right now on that screen. Or let me look at the other kids in the classroom and see whether they're paying and focusing attention. Or let me take my camera and put it up on the roof and on the ceiling and let it focus down on me and see if they can see Raun and what he's doing right now. But this monster cam, and that's simply how you make it. You can make it just with your fingers like that, and kids can go around the room. That is a mindfulness issue. To try and start kids, give them assistance to start focusing on the environment. Can you go close into just looking at his eyelashes, or can you go very far out and see his whole body? You can do marvelous things with this monster cam. It's a great mindfulness tool. So I hope you enjoy it.
Thank you. And I appreciate that you brought the mindfulness piece up as we're concluding, because mindfulness for all of us, but particularly for those who have ADHD, helps them slow down. It just creates that slowness, that focus that can be really hard sometimes. So I love the idea of the Monster Cam, and also your books, the one you held up, the Awfully Anxious. It is such a tremendous series, and listeners, those will be in the show notes. And I do want to say from my own perspective, I think that the parent who's reading to the child or reading with the child also benefits. The adult also benefits because it helps you tune in more to the child's world. And if, like the dad, in today's question, has ADHD, I think it creates a sense of healing for the person reading the book who might see themselves as well in some of the characters.
Exactly.
Well, Dr. Raun, you are absolutely fabulous. I'm so grateful to have you with us today. Where can our listeners find you?
Right now I'm in my office here in
Eating a caramel.
I haven't been.
You didn't catch my joke. I said you were in your office eating a caramel.
Eating a caramel. Oh, right. I should be. I've got a lovely new cup to drink from, though. And
Mr. Happy.
I like that. I got it yesterday for a gift. However, I'm in Scottsdale, Arizona, and I work for a company called Cortica, which Cortica, which has clinics in about 5 or 8 different states across the country. So and we see these kinds of children. So I like the field of developmental pediatrics. I hope there's a developmental pediatrician in your neighborhood, because I think they have a very good sense about what these type of children need. However, more and more primary care doctors are themselves engaging and being very knowledgeable and helpful for families when these issues arise.
Well, thank you so much for being with us today. Listeners, please look in the show notes for resources and for Dr. Raun's information and his wonderful books they're just tremendous. So thank you again, Dr. Raun, for joining us today. It's been such a privilege and a pleasure.
Thank you for having me.
It's just such a pleasure. And thanks to our listeners for joining in with us today. And this is Imperfect Love.
Thanks so much for sharing your time with me today. Remember, you have the power to transform your life and love fearlessly, if imperfectly, and it's my privilege to help you along the way. You can find more life-changing content, including my books and other podcast episodes, at drcarlamanly.com. Feel free to submit your own confidential questions through my website. I'll do my very best to include your issue on a future episode. If you found this podcast helpful, please subscribe and leave a review. Until we connect again, this is Dr. Carla Manly wishing you oceans of blessings and love. Please note, this podcast is psychoeducational in nature and is not intended to replace formal mental health support. Please contact your healthcare provider or emergency hotline if you need psychiatric care. And as always, please take good care of your amazing, wonderful self.